Well, here's a question of me taking the book probably a little bit more serious. Right, it should be taken serious, but this is a fun book. There are space meatballs. But me, and I'm reading it, I'm when Max is without spoiling too much, trapped beneath a whale and eats part of the meatball and then develops superpowers. That's really enough. I don't feel that's superpower. That's spoiling. And I know that meatball, for plot reasons, is going to come back up later. But I still wonder if you know that a little bit of meatball gives you superpowers. Why wouldn't you eat the whole meatball? What happens? You could be Thanos by the end.
Well, we might find out what happens, but and I will say that that meatball was another one where it's just the MacGuffin. It was the thing that sort of gets the story going. And what's funny is there's so many things that can shoot off from the meatball. It's I will say there's a little bit of meatball in book 2. In book 3, you will finally find out what the origin of this meatball is. And it was one of those things where it's just like there's also another character that seems like a throwaway character, and he is the groundskeeper at this miniature golf course in the book. His name's Cody. And the thing, Cody, I have a golden retriever named Cody, so I wrote him very similar. And the thing is, though, is Cody, there's all these things that can happen to this character. And I want to, every time I create a little character like that, or the space meatball, I want it to be important enough in a way that it could become the whole story. And I always use the example is in the Fantastic Four comic book, the great artist Jack Kirby, who created Captain America. He co-created Fantastic Four, the Hulk, the Avengers with Stan Lee, and he just added the Silver Surfer, who many people know of and will probably show up in Marvel movies very soon. He created the Silver Surfer as kind of a throwaway character. And then the Silver Surfer now has had his many series. He's popped up in the Fantastic Four movie. And I always try to think about that fact, like any character can become somebody. And because as a kid, I always loved that when I'd go back and see somebody drawn into the background, and then it turns out later, Batman realizes he's the criminal. And so even with the meatball, there's a little bit of that. I will say I would not advise that if there's a giant space meatball in your life, not to eat it all. But we will see what happens when that meatball is, when other people poke and prod the meatball, what's going to happen. It's not always a positive.
Without spoiling we will see more meatball. No, I understood immediately from a plot perspective why we needed some meatball for later. It was kind of brilliant, though. It was kind of one of the most brilliant. There have been so many different versions of the Superman origin story. But I love it when things go really nuts. Like I know a lot of people had trouble with Frank Miller's version, but I love that. Yeah, send Superman into the military. Send him under the sea. We haven't seen that before. Let's try that. But I always love the Smallville revision that when he comes down, it's with a meteor shower, which is why in our modern age we're not getting pictures of the ship. And then those bits of kryptonite are all around Smallville, so there's always going to be trouble. And they're creating other supervillains, so there's somebody new every week. I always thought that was so that's what you get to do when you're doing the 50th, 70th incarnation of a character. But that's a smart change. I hope that becomes canon from now on.
That's that's funny. I never thought about the fact that that's why they didn't see the spaceship, because all the meteors were coming down on the Smallville TV show.
And this is a pretty smart change.
And it's also why he didn't immediately become super strong, because there's kryptonite everywhere. And the further away he goes, I know a lot of people have felt like, if they stayed in their hometown, that would be like being surrounded by kryptonite. So it's sort of symbolic that when he left Smallville, that's when he really found himself.
Yeah, if he becomes a townie for life, he never even knows how powerful he could be. You gotta head to Metropolis, son.
I know, it's like Clark who works at the car wash.
would be yeah, I would be interested in that version. Anyway, back to Max Meow, but that's what struck me about the meatball was, oh, that's so, because of the way it's used for other things yet to come without spoiling. Oh, that's the asteroid, that's the MacGuffin that's going to allow us to continue. I'm assuming that meatball's coming up in book 2 and book 3.
Yeah, the meatball makes a brief appearance in book 2, but book 3 it comes front and center again. And you learn a little bit about it. There's actually a character in the 3rd book that pops up because of it that you never would have. I don't think I would have even thought of before I sat down to do book 3. I'm like, oh, we need this kind of character. And again, it's a character that when I created it, it was just going to be a character that sort of moved the story along. And I don't want to give too much away, but what has happened is I love this character so much, and I'm like, I would write a whole book series based on this character. And and it's one of those things where it sort of reminded me why I love to create comics, because there's always something more new and fun that pops up every time. And as you know, I won't give away the ending, but in Max Meow Cat Crusader, it's not a cliffhanger as much as something amazing happens at the end. And I try to have that at the end of every one of the Max Meow books. Something's going to happen at the end of book 2 that's going to make you want to read book 3. And for me, that was always what made me want to read more comics. And and comics are how I learned how to read, because as soon as I discovered comics, I just pushed all the Dr. Seuss to the side. And not that I haven't come back and read all those Dr. Seuss books a million times now as a dad and love them, but it just made me want to read more and more. And one of the things when I do school visits is I always point out to kids is that I get so many of my ideas just because I've read so many books, whether they're comics or regular books. And when I was in elementary school, I was known as the kid who read every book in the library. And I think
good writing training.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because someone had to actually remind me of that, and I started to it hit me. The reason I was in the library all the time and could read every book, and it wasn't a giant library, but I read a lot of books, is I think my teacher was sending me away, because if I got my work done, I would distract everybody with jokes or comics or whatever. So it might have been some form of punishment that led to that, but it paid off for me.